Research has shown that protecting, restoring and sustainably managing peatlands can play an important role in combating climate change. But the task of creating national peatlands policy is far from simple. Benefits for the climate may come at the expense of benefits already enjoyed by local communities, and interventions that work in one location may have disastrous consequences when applied in a one-size-fits-all approach. Now, it's easy to criticise policymakers when things go wrong, but I think researchers may need to take some of the blame. The reason I say this is that researchers have a nasty habit of making policy recommendations from single studies. I've been guilty myself of this. When my research funder has told me to make a policy brief at the end of my project, I've always tried my best to come up with something useful that could be done in policy or practice on the basis of my research. But what happens when another researcher comes along with contradictory findings and makes opposing recommendations to the very people I just briefed? Well, maybe one of us got the wrong answer, or perhaps we actually measured different things in different ways, or perhaps differences between our study sites might account for the apparent contradiction. Clearly, this is no way to make good policy, and the civil servants among us know, of course, that their task is to synthesise evidence from the patchwork of multiple studies and sites, rather than relying on single studies, no matter how persuasive the evidence of that one study might appear. But there's a problem. The majority of systematic reviews are unable to find enough high-quality evidence that can be synthesized because everyone's measuring different things. Even if two groups measure the same thing, say water table depth, they may measure it in very different ways, using different methods, which means we still can't synthesize the data. Even if they measure the same thing in the same way, the two groups may present their data in ways that prevent synthesis. For example, omitting crucial contextual details, like the location or altitude at which the data was collected. So I don't know if I'm comparing like with like. In this talk, I'm going to describe a South-South collaboration to standardise peatland data collection based on a workshop that was hosted by ITPC earlier this year. Our goal is ambitious. We want to change the way peatland data is collected and reported around the world, so that more and more people collect data on the same variables in ways that can be synthesized. Ultimately, the goal is to facilitate meta-analysis that can enable more evidence-based policy and practice. I'm going to explain exactly how we'll do this in a moment. But first I want to put all of this into a global policy context with a good news story. Research by Newcastle University in collaboration with the IUCN's Committee on Environmental Management and the UK Peatland Programme and the Global Peatland Initiative is monitoring progress towards a 2016 IUCN resolution on peatlands, which was reflected in new resolutions on global peatlands earlier this year by the UN Environment Assembly and by the Ramsar Convention in 2018. The findings of our survey are surprisingly positive. The majority of countries responding to the survey had or were developing national strategies to protect and restore their peatlands. Priority countries are identified on the basis of the amount of peatland they have and their emissions from peatlands. Those with strategies are in green. Those under development are amber. And those not coloured either don't have a strategy or didn't respond to our request for information. 8 out of 11 priority countries with the largest area of peatlands and the highest peatland emissions had a national strategy. In total, 27 national peatland strategies were found. Most of these included coordination of action to protect existing peatlands, work to assess the distribution and condition of peatlands, and policies to support local communities. Few, however, included policies to sustainably manage peatlands, monitor greenhouse gases, stop peat extraction, or leverage private investment in restoration. We found a number of common barriers to peatland policy. The most important was obvious: a lack of resources. But there were a number of other important barriers, which you can see on the slide. Linked to this work, I am coordinating a group for the Global Peatlands Initiative to identify national research funding opportunities and policy-relevant research priorities that can be coordinated internationally with funding from the UN system. We're focusing where possible on South-South collaborations between GPI countries, the Congos, Indonesia and Peru in particular. But as you can see from this slide, many of the research funders are in fact located in the global north. So far, the group has identified 23 priority research questions on topics ranging from climate change and peatland degradation to governance and blended finance. I'd like to invite you to join the working group, propose your own questions and identify funding sources in your own country via the forms on your seat. One of the key barriers to developing peatland policy, discussed earlier in the week in this pavilion, are the challenges associated with mapping the location and condition of the world's peatlands. As we heard yesterday, one of the world's largest peatlands was only discovered in 2016 under remote tropical forests in the Republic of Congo and Democratic Republic of Congo. However, attempts to better identify and protect peatlands like these are being hampered by problems with data. Here, I want to revisit the challenge I posed at the start of my talk, and I'm going to conclude with this. It can often be difficult to directly compare peatland policy options because researchers have evaluated each option in different ways. For example, whether an option enhances biodiversity or mitigates climate change. It's also difficult to combine insights from different studies about the same issue when studies measure different outcomes in different ways and do not fully or consistently report their data. Data that can't be used is, in my opinion, the ultimate fieldwork fail. If you want to laugh, check out the fieldwork fail hashtag and book, which sadly features me running around a Ugandan forest semi-naked. More seriously though, the upshot of all of this is that many decisions in policy and practice are informed by the results of individual studies, which are often later contradicted by the findings of subsequent research, as I outlined in my introduction. In response to this, I'm coordinating a team with Dr. Gav Stewart and Dr. Dylan Young from Newcastle and the N8 and the Global Peatlands Initiative to standardise the collection of environmental data so it can be combined from multiple studies and sites to better inform policy and practice. After trialling the process in UK peatlands, we're now replicating it for tropical peatlands before exploring the potential to extend the approach to other peatlands around the world. A number of those present here met in Indonesia earlier this year to identify the key variables that could be measured in tropical peatlands. We're going to be supplementing these variables and going through a prioritisation process next year to identify the core outcome measures that the majority of experts agree need to be measured for tropical peatlands. We've just completed the step for our UK trial, and this is the sort of list you get. This is the climatic variables only, and a subset at that of those on the screen. Looking at the top 5 in the list here, you can see that there's a strong agreement amongst the experts that we need to measure the rate of peat accumulation, peatland extent, and peat decomposition. And these will be in the core set of key variables that we'll recommend for measurement in the UK. However, there's less agreement over the importance of measuring peat build-up behind dams and dust losses. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't ever be measured. If they're important for your particular study, then great, prioritise them. But you'll need to do so in the knowledge that there may be few others measuring these variables, and as a result, a lower likelihood that your data may be used in future meta-analysis to inform wider policy and practice. We're now moving to methods, and we're identifying reliable methods that could be used to collect data for each of the priority variables, ranging from highly accurate but expensive and time-consuming methods that are typically the domain of researchers, to methods that can be used by non-researchers and those with limited resources. This is important if we want to engage communities in citizen science, or if we want to enable practitioners and other organisations with limited resources to collect reliable data on the key variables that have been prioritised. If you want to take part in the next step to prioritise tropical peatland variables, then I'd love to work with you. We're planning an event, and it will also be possible to help electronically, so please indicate your interest via the second form on your seat. To conclude, I think if we're serious about evidence-based policy and practice, South-South initiatives like the identification of core outcomes for tropical peatlands are of crucial importance. This initiative won't instantly enable us to harmonise data to create accurate global peat maps, or provide evidence synthesis to support the next decision you need to make. But we must stop and think about how we collect and report data now, if we want the data we collect to enable more evidence-based policy and practice in years to come.